Letterboxd has been my favorite app and website since I made an account in 2019 at the age of 16. It's gotten way bigger since then, but I remember my golden age of Letterboxd. The New Zealand-based platform was created in 2011 by Matthew Buchanan and Carl Von Rando to be a social media platform for online film nerds. Almost like a more user-friendly version of IMDb, where you can log, rate, and list almost every film and interact with other users via their own reviews, lists, and profiles. I'm not exactly a Letterboxd OG, but when I made my account back in 2019, the platform was way smaller. It was very much this niche thing that only the most die-hard film nerds knew about, I think. At least compared to now. At the time, I would have been in my film bro fetus stage with my Tarantino obsession, but also being an undiagnosed neurodivergent, I had already discovered the French New Wave, spaghetti westerns, and blaxploitation films. Not that I necessarily understood or really enjoyed everything, but grown-up films were still very much this wonderful new thing I had just discovered, and there was this endless sea I just had to discover. Naturally, I didn't know a single person with my shared interests and largely relied on video essays and list videos on YouTube to know what was out there. But that was until I discovered this Letterboxd thing that Carson Ronquist was always chilling at the end of his videos. Letterboxd was like the gateway to infinity. Every film I could possibly conceive of, right there to discover. Not to watch, but to find. Every director, every actor, all the lists, unhinged reviews, this was the point of no cinematic return, and I was here for it.
Oh no, Letterboxd.
The app's gotten more popular since then, maybe by design. It's no longer this big secret cinephiles have. Now most young people in countries where film and cinema going is any part of culture may have a little Letterboxd account that they use, or at least have opinions about the app. You see, not everyone's too fond of the app, and the culture of cinema going is arguably helped to normalize. Not everyone's that fond of those silly one-liner reviews, but the greatest criticism I've seen of Letterboxd culture, which prevents many people from making an account altogether, in spite of all the great and wonderful aspects of Letterboxd that I fell in love with years ago, is that one feature, for better or worse, one of its most iconic features.
A warning, this report further goes with levels and contains images and some use may find distressing from
Things are not looking good right now. 2025 has just begun, and already it feels like we are living in a sci-fi dystopian drama from the 1980s. When I began writing this, we were barely 2 weeks into the year, and already a whole town has been burning to a crisp. Donnie's been found guilty of all accused crimes and is only getting off free because he's been elected to be the most powerful person on the planet. Every prominent social media platform and CEO has pivoted its policies to serve Donnie, effectively throwing all non-Caucasian cis-hetero males under the bus. They panned TikTok for about 14 hours just to prove that they could. Every corner of the internet has pivoted to force its users to engage with AI, whether they consent to it or not. The Palestinians have been allegedly given peace, but Netanyahu been moving kinda shifty. Locally, there's been a gang war going on. Have I mentioned that a whole town is getting burnt down? I've heard it said that everything that's going on in the world right now is apocalyptic. Last year was the hottest year on record. The year before that was the hottest year then. We had 11 hurricanes, 5 major ones last year. I was affected by one. A couple more just missed us. A few windstorms caught us though. That never used to happen. I never experienced a windstorm until last year. Have I mentioned that South California has been set ablaze? And the bastards in charge are getting paid to pretend that climate change does not exist at all. Waking up in the morning is becoming difficult again. It all begins to feel meaningless. At every step, the future, an idealized future, becomes bleaker and bleaker. I can maybe make the best of my own life, get what's mine, make my own money, try to foster my own relationships, but on a large scale, the sky becomes redder, clouded with smoke. It gets in my eyes, it fills my lungs. That phrase flashes through my mind.
And I'll give you a kiss.
The idea of the world having an inevitable end is one I've been acquainted with my whole life, whether due to the inevitability of climate change or God's great return for his people. The idea that Earth has a definitive endpoint is one which has always been a given, and I've been told to expect it within my lifetime. I honestly thought it was going to be 2020, so the fact that we actually made it past was genuinely kind of a shock. You're told to look out for things like increased natural disaster, war and conflict, famine and disease, moral decay, I mean that's so subjective, but whatever, false prophets, persecution and ostracization of God's people, also very subjective, and false Christs. You can see why in 2020 I would have been convinced that it's Jover. You can also see why now I'm hearing many people say the same thing. But for real this time, it's a compelling argument and a lot is happening. It definitely hasn't looked more end of the world-ish in the short time I've been here. There was a time when I didn't know anything about the world. I mean, I had the end times thing, but you're hardly acquainted with what is happening inside of your bubble. But now, through the screen, you see everything, delivered and filtered through by the various designated channels, which will always present the stories as they will.
This year's TruthCon marked the beginning of the Great Awakening. Y'all saw what happened in my live stream. My dear friend and fellow superhero Splinter and me got attacked by deep state operatives sent by socialist.
What you'll notice is that most people have this secret notion that the world is going to meet its inevitable end, but people have different ideas about how. There's a lot of very interesting and exciting ways we can all just go out, and they all seem very possible now. Likely even. I haven't been in the world for that long in the grand scheme of things, but things are getting bad in a way that my mind continuously struggles to process. The Palestinian situation and its widespread broadcast on social media was one of the first things to really, truly make my opinions on the world and its people sink. I cannot imagine what it's like to be over there, and its justification by anyone makes me question the depths of humanity's capability. The recent LA fires have also left me somewhat stunned, as it reminds me that nature has no favorites. Fires have happened before, all over the world. California as well, but seeing footage of whole cities getting burnt to a crisp, particularly these cities, I throw dirt at Hollywood and celebrity culture all the time, but to see how quickly so many of these people can just lose their homes and indeed their lives. Of course, they aren't the only people in California, and of those who've lost their mansions, they're probably going to be alright, but everyone else, my god. And after all these fires are through, even the recovery is probably going to take years. Not only the physical restoration of the damn place, but on a human level, I can't wrap my head around what that is, And climate change is only going to get worse. It can't get better, can it? And once again, my mind struggles to go anywhere but that phrase. It's the end of the world. In 2020, during lockdown, I was already watching films more than most people, but thanks to Letterboxd, I became a different beast. I was clocking in an average of 2 films per day. I remember I would often spend up to hours just going through Letterboxd rabbit holes, the way I used to Wikipedia pages. The wealth of film logs that could just be found through scrolling through Letterboxd was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Many of my favorite films, directors, and actors are directly because of those Letterboxd rabbit holes. I wouldn't have known about Shuji Terayama had I not thought the title "Throw Away Your Books, Rally in the Streets" sounded funny. I wouldn't have developed my random affinity to Marcello Mastroianni if not for a random review of the Pixar film Luca, which had a random Marcello Mastroianni cameo, as well as a bunch of Fellini references. Fellini's the next one. I wouldn't have fallen down that rabbit hole if not for Letterboxd. It is strange, random things like that, I spent hours reading and laughing at unhinged Letterboxd reviews. They weren't quite the one-liners we have now that are very obviously trying to be funny. No. There used to be an art to the unhinged Letterboxd review. Sometimes, believe it or not, they're not even unhinged, but genuinely insightful or at least interesting. Just people talking about their experiences with a film or what it means to them. However, time has passed, and Letterboxd seemed to start taking itself somewhat seriously around 2022 when they began to go out and interview actual directors and actors, going to red carpet stuff and occasionally actual screenings. Then people found Iowa DeBerry's account, an absolute goldmine by the way, around the time she started popping off and bullied her off the damn place when she started getting too big.
My current relationship with Letterboxd, after having a very public relationship with Letterboxd, is that I'm really kind of chilling because these people are coming after my reviews and I'm just here to have a good time and be a little bit of a fool.
It was clear that Letterboxd's place in culture was beginning to change. The change was arguably solidified when they made an algorithm update which affected the placements of their top 250 list, pushing some long-time placeholders out of the list entirely, pushing some things upward. Interestingly, around the time Across the Spider-Verse came out and immediately dominated the list, which received a lot of backlash. For some reason, I don't know! They said the change was coming from before, the timing was just pure coincidence, though it did highlight some things, you know? A lot of non-US and non-European films got pushed lower or kicked out of the list altogether. The list started to resemble that of IMDb's, if not a little bit more artsy. But by the end of 2023, it was official that Letterboxd was no longer some underground secretive film nerds. I think we all remember where we were when Martin Scorsese posted on Instagram that he, or at least his people, created a Letterboxd account.
Martin Scorsese, you recently joined Letterboxd and you gave us a wonderful list of 6 pictures that inspired Killers of the Flower Moon as part of a larger list of over 50 works that inspired your whole filmography. So from one Sicilian American to the other, welcome to the family.
Yeah, thank you.
On one hand, it was awesome that we internet film nerds were being acknowledged by the CEO of cinema himself, who immediately toppled our own Karsten Ronquist as the most followed account. However, it was also bittersweet, you know? It's fine, the app is the same, the website is the same, in fact the UI, famously, hasn't changed almost at all in the 14-ish years it's been running, but it feels like culturally there's been a little shift in what Letterboxd is, how it's used, and what people get from it. Obviously, you can't just evaluate the entire worth of art with numbers, we know this. But I've been an avid user of Letterboxd's rating system anyway. I'll tell you what each rating meant. 5 stars, this is cinema. Perfect, down to the last detail, no flaws, no notes, possibly changed my life, I'm completely and totally satisfied, or connect with this enough to look past any possible blemishes. Brilliant. 4.5. Very good but not perfect. Would recommend, would probably watch again on a good day. Did everything but change my life. 4. This was the one I most commonly used and it simply meant good. Above average. Liked it. Not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but I dug it. Thumbs up. 3.5. It was decent. Did not feel like I wasted my time. I liked it. 3. Mid. Not bad per se, but I probably could have done something else. 2.5. I did not like it. We'll pretend like this didn't happen. 2. Bad. Low-key might have wasted my time with this one. 1.5. Offensively bad. At this point, it not only feels like a waste of time, but watching this thing might have hurt me. 1. I take ethical issue with someone or something involved in the creation of whatever this is. I may hesitate to call it art. Half star. Birth of a Nation. Of course, none of these things were ever set in stone. There have always been films which kinda stumped me when it comes to numeric ratings, such as Pink Flamingos, which in a lot of ways crosses many ethical boundaries for me. It is not an enjoyable watch almost at all, but I respect a lot of what it's doing and its placement in the cinematic canon.
To give us some of your political beliefs.
Kill everyone now. Condone first-degree murder. Advocate cannibalism. Eat shit. Filter my politics.
Same thing for Pasolini's Salo, but then there are those which it would be kinda stupid to rate, like pre-1900s experimental shorts. But even within the sphere of numeric ratings, there are films which I gave a certain rating which didn't necessarily match up to those descriptions. I have ethical and ideological issues with most of my favorite films. I don't consider any of them to truly be perfect. I don't necessarily even like many films that make it to 3.5 or 4 either. Even of those before, I may just rate it out of respect for the craft, even if I'm not necessarily connecting in any real way. I've forgotten a lot of these films, actually. I'll be getting notifications that people liked my review of Elia Kazan's A Face in the Crowd, and I'm thinking, I remember putting it on my watch list. Have I already watched A Face in the Crowd? Apparently not only have I watched it, but I liked it. According to the old rating at least, and my clever little one-liner review, people, I truly do not remember having ever watched that film. I could not tell you what happened. I found that Letterboxd has also become directly linked to my cinema going. Almost every time, if not every single time I go to the cinema physically to watch a film, I log it on Letterboxd almost immediately afterwards, vomiting my thoughts onto my phone. In what I may now identify as a neurodivergent trait of overstimulation, I'm usually very overwhelmed, typically in a good way, watching things physically in that large dark room and seeing everything play out the way it ought to. Leaving that place almost feels like exiting an alternative realm, and I'm left with a whirlwind of thoughts and feelings that frighten me almost. Leaving me feeling burdened to articulate them, dispelling them almost in the form of a Letterboxd review and an accompanying star rating. I'll find a little corner that has Wi-Fi, and I promptly explain away my thoughts and feelings so I don't, like, explode or something. I'm always explaining things or looking for explanations. Like, in my head, these ideas are all fragmented and scattered, but when I explain them, I'm able to get some semblance of control. I happen to feel like I come closer to understanding things through art, and I usually explain things in my head through stories, whether those I create or those created by others. Obviously. For real though, I think I am truly just documenting my attempts to make sense of life and articulate the ideas in my head through art, explaining concepts that squirm around and have been squirming around in my head through stories that already exist. And by doing this and making my little Letterboxd reviews, I'm attempting, maybe, to gain control over a lot of things that overwhelm me to just sit and think about. But it is, in a sense, minimizing the reality of that situation, isn't it?
That's the hype! Newest, latest. Let me tell you the story of right hand, left hand.
The story of good and evil. H-A-T-E. It was with this left hand that old brother Cain
Iced his brother. Love. These 5 fingers.
These fingers has veins that run straight to the soul of man. The right hand, friends, the hand of love.
The story of life is this. Static.
These fingers, dear hearts, is always a warring and a tugging, one again to other. Now watch 'em. Old brother left hand hates a fighting.
I mean, it looks like the right hand love is finished.
But wait a minute. Wait a minute. Hot dog loves a winning.
Yeah, he got the left hand on the ropes now, that's right. Yeah, ooh, it's a devastating right and hate is hurt. Down!
Good and evil is an age-old dichotomy that probably has no real foundation in any form of anything. We know this. But I've been an avid user of these words anyway. They're easy, vivid words, and when used by people who speak English, they typically know what it is you're trying to communicate. When using either word, good or evil, I am knowingly using them for hyperbole. I always use hyperbole in my writing, it's effective. They're powerful and basic, they get the job done. However, of course, there is nuance. Sometimes I am very liberal with the usage of the words and use them in a sort of ironic, joking way because of how obviously subjective the whole thing is. I may feel led to use the word good to refer to something I think is well done. I think Jared Carmichael's reality show we did last year is good television. It uses the mechanics of its medium well to convey a story I think is fascinating. However, the show crosses all kind of moral and ethical boundaries that I just can't get down with. It's a bit evil. But then I may also use the words to describe something like advertising as evil. I think advertising is an evil art form. Yes, it is art. Because it is inherently manipulative.
Hey guys, it's Josh. What's posh? Here's my favorite number. You guys are gonna love this one. So, did your daddy never scrub you? I couldn't afford background music.
And typically used to exploit people for money. However, in truth, advertising is a neutral form because you could be advocating for all sorts of services or goods, exploitative or not, for profit or not. It is purely a means of getting eyeballs on your cause. Then sometimes I'll call myself evil for being that one schmuck at college sometimes will hit you with that, it's just a social construct, bro. And freak out some of the fundamentalists in my philosophy courses, or do all my assignments on time and then bag straight A's, you know.
In case you haven't noticed, I'm weird. I'm a weirdo. I don't fit in.
I'm not actually doing anything wrong, but I may exist within these contexts as a disturbance in the peace of my course mates sometimes. A comparison for the lecturer to make, or a reason for lots of uncomfortable 3 a.m. reflection. But obviously these are all moral and neutral and or ambiguous things. The good and evil dichotomy mostly serves to divide the world into binary, often problematically binary standpoints of conflict and division. In that example I give of myself being evil, it points to the fact that what we often call evil is just stuff that makes us uncomfortable or disturbs a construct of reality. I still use those words though because they work. They're very simple, very easy, very powerful words in the English language, which is regrettably the one given to me and the one I write. We live in a world of words which mean and govern and navigate everything we engage with, even though it's all made up. Certain words exist and they're used to convey things in a simple way, even if they don't completely capture the true essence of things. I recently sought out and eventually got diagnosed with ASD and anxiety disorder, then made a video about it. A lot of people really connected with that. It was one of my best received videos in a very long time, but I know there's a lot of people who don't, and won't ultimately get why it was so important for me to do that. The point of the video was to talk about queerness as a general concept and the role that art can serve in opening up the reality that lies beyond the artifice of the material. The fact that none of these words ultimately mean anything really, and people are just a lot more than what we often allow them to be. While the urgency for the diagnosis was because my anxiety's been getting worse, it's been useful for me to find the word autism because it means I'm a person who exists and not just a defective attempt at a person. When describing autism in the video, I often referred to it as a word that almost if not completely describes my case, but there's a lot of things I didn't talk about. I am a three-dimensional human being beyond this small box after all. There's a lot of stories I didn't bother getting into because it just didn't seem ultimately to be that important, and I'm not sure how relatable they'll be to the general public. The den of misery that was the Barbo, the many traumatic experiences I had in church, the place I can now retroactively see as being a den of weekly sensory overstimulation. Not everyone has a preacher grandfather who thoroughly lives in the world of good and evil, angels and demons. When I first started to take some steps to seek assistance for my mental health, this would have been now maybe 4-ish years ago. At that point I was thinking it might be ADHD. My mother, for God knows what reason, decided it would be a good idea to tell her father. I got a call in the middle of the day when I was in an online class. My grandfather sounds worried, sick to death, almost. I tell him I'm in a class and he tells me to call him back. I do later that day and he asks how I'm feeling. I don't know, same as I ever was.
Same as it ever was.
He tells me he hears I'm getting some kind of counseling. What's wrong with me? I say I'm not terribly sure. I wouldn't necessarily use the word wrong either, but I list the symptoms I'm experiencing. At that point, he stops me and starts giving instructions. People, you must not laugh. He tells me to go into my bathroom, go in front of my faucet, cough. These things are airborne. He then performs what can only be described as an exorcism over the phone.
I cast you out!
He gives me some prayers to repeat, chants to repeat. I hear my grandmother praying and speaking in tongues in the background, trying to get rid of my airborne autism. They be asking me if I'm watching any of those strange cartoons. I kid you not. People, let me tell you something. I have very strong feelings about mental health. I have for a long time. I do not take these things lightly. I know it's a whole meme, you know, how TikTok made Gen Z fetishize autism, but I don't play with these things, yeah. I was reminded that my grandfather lives in a world where mental health issues and neurodivergence does not exist. It is angels and demons. Because he doesn't know terms like autism and ADHD, he just sees demon. And he was convinced that his own firstborn grandchild had been possessed by demons because the poor old man just He doesn't know the right words. I confronted my mother about telling him later that day, to which she responds that he was just doing what he thought he had to do. Of course, I knew that. She asks, "Do you not think, though, that mental illness is born from demonic oppression?" And there I realized there are truly some things I need to take care of for myself. For months upon months after that, my grandfather kept asking me if I was feeling better, if the depression was gone. Did I say I was depressed? If I had been cured from being the way I have been for my entire life, but only recently found the words to describe. This year I decided, perhaps as a little experiment, to stop rating films on Letterboxd, or at least to try to stop. Ratings never really meant anything to me before, but I decided, you know what? Screw it. Let's see if ratings really are the death of cinema. It's still early days, but I have definitely noticed some changes. I'm reviewing films more. When I log two films next to each other, I still want to express in some way how I feel about them. I recently saw Nights of Cabiria for the first time. I had a lot of thoughts and feelings about it. I was actually surprised how much it connected with me, and I wanted to hold on to that feeling. Or maybe give it some kind of permanence. The impulse I get is to slap on the 4.5 stars, but instead I force myself to actually sit down and process the parts of it that I connected to and verbalize what would have been an abstract rating. But then I actually doubled it with the recent Jesse Eisenberg film, A Real Pain, and decided not to review it. I liked it just as much, I think, and was equally surprised by how much it connected, but I don't know. I just didn't feel as much of a compulsion to verbalize that. Maybe because Cabiria is a film classic and a massive blind spot for a Fellini fan like myself. There's a level of performance to it that I'm not necessarily tugged by with A Real Pain. Maybe because A Real Pain is just more difficult for me to explain away, and I just want to keep some of those scattered thoughts to myself. But there's an unease in that. I do feel a little troubled by not expressing the connection I find in both Eisenberg and Culkin's characters, or the very cozy but anxiety-inducing atmosphere that the film managed to elicit. Almost like if I leave it there as a blank like, I have no way of making sense of it. I mean, I'm cheating right now by talking about it here, but on my feed, how else is a person viewing and perceiving me through my film taste going to know that I like this for any different or similar reason than I liked Bird, which also came out last year, which I also didn't review. There's almost a lack of control that I have over the art that I consume when I don't explain it away, though I am thinking about it more, maybe even feeling it more. But those feelings are very unpredictable. Feelings are scary. There's a lot of people in this world, a lot of people who feel things, do things, experience different things. It's dizzying. Maybe we aren't meant to be exposed to all of that at the same time. It's a rather unique reality that people my age have. We, from a very early age, are exposed to a lot of things that previous generations were sheltered from. Most of the agonies of the world that give me grief are occurring miles and miles away from me. My place has its own problems, and lots of them, But being exposed to all these things, you do see a lot of parallels. You learn new words, maybe. There are a lot of words that have been invented and used to describe, identify, and categorize the things and people that we see around us. Those scattered, unpredictable people and things. You could even call it a construct.
Shut the fuck up!
These categories exist to help us make sense of the things around us and help us to better engage with them. The word autism has helped me to contextualize a lot of things. It's useful in that way, though nothing really can or probably should be done about it. However, I will still always tell you that it is just a word. Very expensive word, but it is a word. I am still myself, whatever that is. Same for queer, it's just a word. I just want to do things that I want to do and not do things that I don't want to do because of some alleged mythology of what is natural. But I still don't want to be crushed and stifled by those words. I have a race because I was born with one. Race doesn't really exist, but I was born into a world that's structured as though it does. I was born into a place with certain circumstances I didn't ask for, but, you know, it is what it is. I can act as though these things don't matter, but the world of words reminds me of these things from time to time, whether I like it or not. We exist in a world of made-up words that mean almost nothing but have great consequence. Words make prickly things smooth, they make scary things controllable, they make things simple, but also sometimes flat. The end of the world is a very simple, very easy concept to grasp. As humans, we all die, we know that. If the world just ends, it would be just as simple. There are a lot of things you don't have to worry about if the world ends. If we're all going to die, what's the point? What's the point of helping people? What's the point of making things better? This year's been comically bad so far. I made a little vague teaser for this very video on my YouTube community tab, and then David Lynch died that same day. We are in the worst timeline, people. It's much more difficult than it isn't to be pessimistic when you are in any way cognizant of the things happening around you. There's a lot of despair going on because it's easy. The urgency of the world's demise makes more sense than not at this point. However, of course, it just isn't that simple.
I started to dream, and some scenes came.
I started writing this in a world where David Lynch was alive, and now he's not, and I've been thinking about him a lot. His philosophy of how art should be felt but not necessarily explained has informed so much of my own approach in both creation and consumption. I've always had a little disdain for the genre that exists in my own medium here of explained videos. They can be useful. Lots of art does need context, especially if it's from a culture or time you aren't familiar with. But I hate having a work of art broken down for me unless I'm studying it for a test or maybe a video and I'm trying to take something in particular from it. I think every work of art has so much richness that can be taken from it. There are so many angles, so many perspectives, so many little ways it can ricochet and vibrate off of and within you, revealing things in people. All those prickly, mysterious, difficult, and frightening things. When you try to write them off or explain them away, you can lose that. You think before you feel, and all becomes plastic. Objects made disposable. A guy with back problems revealed something to a lot of people across the board who usually disagree on almost everything. He made them realize that they all shared something. But before his action could affect anything, we were quick to package him, make him into a trend, a meme, an object, analyze him, take him apart, then throw him away. For long we forget what the point even was. I've always had a little ethical thing against talking about living, breathing human beings like objects or specimens to take apart and analyze, and this entire Luigi situation for me is like proof of why that's valid. There's a little joke that J-Reg likes to make about how nothing ever happens, and it's funny because that's how it feels. Even when you look at everything, of course, a lot of things are happening, but it all just feels meaningless and empty. I must reiterate that everything I'm talking about is coming from the particular standpoint of Westoid, chronically online, Gen Zennial doomerism. This feels like a particular phenomenon that happens when your mind becomes mushish. Depending on how pessimistic I'm feeling on that day, I sometimes refer to the internet as a graveyard of ideas. Nothing matters here because everything matters all the time. It's all packaged and delivered in easily digestible, consumers entertaining bites. I first heard about the Luigi thing when someone on Twitter joked about how they just saw a video about a guy getting shot dead and didn't feel anything. But then when we all got a bit more context, everyone universally celebrated the actions of New York's Robin Hood. Everyone but the wealthy, at least. Everyone had been screwed over by healthcare. Everyone had a bone to pick with those with means who quite literally have the power to control every facet of our lives. For but a moment, people felt something. Something real. Something actually happened. But then, of course, it was merely the actions of an individual, and America is a country whose gods are just superheroes, so they sat and waited for him to do something else, or perhaps for someone else to do something. For a moment, Millions of people realized they had power, but that phenomenon is not one that can exist in the construct of America. So they went on as usual. Those who already would have been organizing went on doing so, but the vast majority just continued scrolling Twitter and making fan cam edits. Because that's all that makes sense to them. We can't actually let things happen. Things are scary. Things are unpredictable. Maybe it's easier to live in a world that's ending, because that's at least something you can understand. Who knows what might happen if we allow ourselves to act like it isn't. People continue attacking each other for nonsense, perhaps by design, and now the exact guys he targeted have gotten more powerful than ever. Can a person ever really exist if their name is in a trending tab? Do films really exist when we evaluate their worth through numbers? Even if you know that these things like numbers and algorithms don't have any value, we trap ourselves within them. Perhaps by design, we're often blinded by the binaries. We fear sincerity. We're atomized. We fear looking at things for what they are in their rawness. The prickly, unpredictable thing that can happen when we look at things as they are sometimes. Things aren't great, but these things have happened before. California's ablaze. They took my goat. It feels like the end of the world, but it's climate change. Climate catastrophe, maybe, but it is something we can look at for what it is. Not some vague sign of end times or inevitability we must sit on our hands and cry about. Words are important. We used to call what we're seeing global warming, but now it's snowing in California, so that term's no longer completely accurate. The words keep changing because the reality of what we're seeing is very complicated. Maybe they can't be completely captured with words at all. I like to refer to heterosexuals as heterosexuals because it's funny. The notion of reducing entire three-dimensional human beings to the whims of their hormones is obviously ridiculous, but we live in a world of images that put people into boxes. These letterboxes.
Shut the fuck!
Some schmucks that I don't like and probably wish me and my allies harm have gotten very powerful recently. Maybe they always have been that powerful and I just didn't know. Getting overwhelmed is understandable, normal, and expected. It's not the end of the world. There are words for all of this, and this has happened before. And if they prove different from what we think, we can still come up with new words and evolve those that already exist. In those days when I first began combing my way through Letterboxd and falling down the cinematic rabbit hole, I wasn't thinking about what a good or bad film was. I was just in awe of how much there was. How many worlds and angles and perspectives there were. That was the joy of Letterboxd. I think it still is, or can be the joy of it, because that is the joy of film and the joy of art. Just looking at things for what they are and can be. That's why I always found it so ironic and a bit sad that for so many, Letterboxd was a sign of films flattening. Though they may be valid in how it can be used. I love Letterboxd, but for the time being I want to practice feeling films. Watching them and feeling them more before I fan them off with abstract numbers. Maybe I'll be compelled to say more about them, because there'll be more to say. Maybe I won't, for the same reason. There's a lot going on in this world and a lot of prickly, unpredictable things there. Frightening. But there'll be more to say about it if we don't trap ourselves with thoughts of calamity and hopelessness. Maybe our lack of hope is that calamity.
Hello. We're all very happy to be here tonight. First of all, I'd like to introduce my boys. This is Chucko, and this is Buster, and this is Pete. I'm David Lynch, and this is Bob, and this is Dan. The boys wanted me to wish you peace and happiness. And these guys aren't just a bunch of goofballs. They know that there's plenty of suffering in the world, and they spent many years with little iron hooks in their backs up on Sunset Boulevard. And but they tell me that there's this all-pervading happiness underneath everything. And the more time I spend with them, the more I believe it. And so we wish you peace and happiness, and long live Eraserhead. Thanks a million.